Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi. Now recently I was contacted by the guys over at Geek Force to say that they had been given a toy, which I know is a Millennium Falcon from Star Wars, that had been buried in someone's greenhouse for the past 30 years. And they thought they would send it to me to see if it was something that could be restored. Now I've seen a few images of what they've sent me and it looks pretty rough, but today I received a package in the post. So here is the box with the 30 years buried in the ground Millennium Falcon. So let's open this up and we'll see how it looks and whether at all it can be restored. Let's get this box open. Well, it's been well packaged, so that's always a good sign. Let's see what we've got in here. Well, it does look like the remains of a falcon. Let's see what else there is. And look at that, very kindly given to me by the guys over at Geek Force. A cool Geek Force t-shirt. I think I'm going to be wearing that while I fix this toy. So here's what we have from inside the box. As you can see, it looks from a glance like a pretty good Falcon. It's only on closer inspection that you see how damaged this thing has been by being buried in the ground. Here's the back panel for the Falcon. As you can see, there's a bit missing off the corner there, and one of the tabs that is supposed to hold this in place is snapped off. I don't think I've ever seen one broken in that way. Looks like it's missing a few other bits, but yeah, so pretty beaten. Look at the main part of the Falcon. From at first glance, looks alright, but if you turn it around here, you'll see that there is it looks like it's been trodden on. I'm guessing if it's been buried in the ground in a greenhouse, that someone probably has trodden on it. It's cracked all around here. There's a big crack through here, another one through here. In fact, the top of it is pretty beaten. I'll have to see what can be done about that. Let's open it up. It's already been unscrewed so we can see what's inside it. Fairly filthy. Gary did say that he'd given it a bit of a clean, but it looks like it could do with quite a lot more of a clean. I can see some of the little tabs that hold the top on have also been broken, so there's a few of those snapped off, but it does have the sort of main cockpit section and the front leg, and it looks like it's got a motor. We'd like to be able to see if that works at all. What else have we got? We've got the rear legs, which again, pretty bad condition. One of them's missing a foot completely and the other one's missing all the tabs off it. I probably have a few of these spare in my spares pot. We've got the side panels. It looks like there's at least one of those missing, I would guess. Just from what I remember, there should be 4 of those and a battery compartment. Yep, so it looks like we're missing a couple of extra bits of those. And then there's the inner cardboard. Now this really does look in quite a state. It's pretty rough, yeah, it's mouldy and damp and damaged, so I think we'll have to find a replacement for that as well. I've now had a better chance to look this ship over now that it's sort of out of the box, and I've taken a few more pieces off it, and the bulk of the ship isn't too bad. It's only the top section that really has an awful lot of damage to it. A lot of the bits are broken, the sort of the side panels and bits are broken, like the legs are, but those things can easily be replaced, and chances are I've got a few of those already in my sort of spares box. The real problems are with this top section. It really does look like someone has trodden on it. You can see there's a very large crack all along this sort of area here, and it actually extends all the way around here. You can see there's a big crack here. Underneath that is one of the posts that are attached to the bottom section. There's a crack all around there, and then there's more sort of cracks along this section here. Another crack around the radar dish, if you can see that there. If I turn it over, you'll probably see these a little bit better. You can just about see there's a crack through there, and all of this section here, you can actually see light through it. That's how badly cracked this area is. It's pretty damaged. Also, a couple of the posts that you sort of the screws go into to hold this section onto the bottom section. You can see here the posts are cracked and snapped off. Luckily we do have the posts though, so that shouldn't be too hard to fix. I reckon those can just be glued in place, and then if we use longer screws that bypass the crack section and screw into the sort of good section above it, it should be okay. So really, I think the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to give this a good clean. I'm going to put this in particularly hot water so that the plastic softens a bit, and I can start to sort of push some of these cracks back into shape, because what's happened is they've cracked and then sort of pushed underneath each other, so you've got quite a lip, and I've already pushed a few back just by hand, but I think if I warm this up I should be able to bend this back a lot better. You can see here, this is what I mean, you can see the cracked plastic is sort of bowed out a bit, so by warming that up I should be able to push these two sections back together and hopefully get it looking a little bit sort of well, a little bit flatter. And then once that's done I can start gluing bits of it back together. I think some of it we can just glue with super glue. Anything that's actually going to be hidden inside the bulk of the ship, I'm going to buy some sort of epoxy glue or something like that, something a bit sturdier but that takes a little bit longer to set and also looks a little bit messier, that I can hide on the inside of here but should end up gluing it pretty firmly. So first up, let's get this all clean because it's still pretty filthy. Now that I've cleaned the Falcon, the broken bits are much more obvious, and so we can clearly see what needs to be done still. As you can see here, there are some quite large cracks on the surface of the Falcon. I've tried to push these back together as best I can while the plastic was hot, and they've got a lot flatter. They're still a little bit sort of bowed, but there's not a lot I can do about that. In fact, this one here is probably the worst one. You can quite clearly see there's quite a big crack there. So what we've got to do now is to fix these, and obviously we're going to do this from the inside. Inside as well, you can clearly see now actually the cracks there. They're quite large and quite pronounced. So what I'm going to use is going to use some milliput to sort of stick over these cracks, and hopefully that should fix them and secure them quite sort of strongly, and also fill any obvious gaps that I can either paint or cover with stickers at a later date. I've done a quick test with the milliput just to check that it works quite well. As you can see here, I've done a few little bits of gluing on the base section of the Falcon. Both of these posts were sort of part snapped at the bottom, so I've just carefully pushed the milliput around, and they've actually gone back in pretty firmly. You would hardly be able to move those now, and the top little peg there was missing. As you can see here in the distance, it should have a little peg like that, so I've recreated one of those with the milliput, and that seems to work quite well. So I'm pretty hopeful that this is going to work on the top section. So let's get ahead and do some of that. If you've not used milliput before, it's pretty good for fixing things like this. You can actually model and sculpt things out of it, but for gluing plastics like this, it is particularly good because it really bonds very well to these surfaces. So it's a two-part sort of epoxy. In the pack you'll get, show you two different types of the milliput, and you cut off exactly the same sort of amounts of each and then mix the two together, and then we can push those on and sort of mould it to fit. Obviously I'm going to be wearing latex gloves while doing this because I don't particularly like this stuff on my hand. You never know what it's going to do to your skin. And before I actually start even mixing this, The surfaces either side of the bits I'm going to fix, so this large crack that I've got here, I'm going to scratch with a knife just so that there's a little bit more sort of, well, just a little bit more stuff for the milliput to grip on. So you can see here I've just got a knife and I'm going to gently sort of scratch the surface just to make sure that there's lots of good sort of gripping points all the way along this. Especially these are such large cracks, you want to make sure everything is going to glue and stick fully. So I'm going to need a fair amount of the milliput because I've got quite large areas to glue. It's pretty easy to stuff to work with. It's like dealing with sort of plasticine or something like that. So as you can see here, I've got one type. I'm just going to cut off a section like so. And here's the other section. So we need to get equal amounts of the two types. Just do that. And then you just got to mix it together. This takes a few minutes to mix everything and get it all evenly mixed up. So now it's all mixed up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on one of the deeper cracks. As you can see here, there's quite a large crack down the front section of the Falcon. So I'm just going to break off a section of this milliput like so, and then mould it into a longer sort of sausage shape, and then start pushing it into the crack. And I'm going to try and, well, to be honest, I don't need to even make this particularly neat because all of this is hidden, but what I want to do is push it quite well into the crack so it squidges out the other side, and I can then mould it to sort of fill any gaps there are in this crack. It takes about 2 hours to go off, so there's plenty of time for sculpting and getting it sort of to look the right sort of shape, and then in the end I'll paint it if it's really obvious, but hopefully it will blend in quite well. So there's that first bit, and I can then just carry on moving my way around until I've covered all of this crack and all of this section, and just fill in every single crack on the top of this ship. So you can see here where the milliput has come through, where I've sort of squidged it into one of the larger cracks, and that's great because I can now just carefully use, well, I'm actually just using a screwdriver here to take that little bit off that's on the outside, and I should just be able to gently sort of shape that. Milliput is great because you can actually shape it with water, so if I just get a bit of water on the end of my screwdriver here, I can start to smooth this down and actually give it some shape and make that crack look almost invisible. And by the time I put a little bit of paint on that as well, that should look pretty nice. So I'm just going to go ahead and do some of these other sort of larger cracks around here in the same method. So I just got a bit of water, and again you can just sort of gently push that on and shape it, and it should shape up quite nicely. So here we have all of the bits sort of filled and repaired. It's now a case of waiting. It takes about 2 hours to go off, but I'll actually leave this overnight, so sort of 24 hours, and then I can try and fix the last few cracks. There are a few bits that are in the main section of the hull, so bits that you will actually be able to see that aren't covered by the sort of bits of cardboard and sort of whatnot that go on in here. So those I'm going to have to fix with super glue. As you can see here at the front there's a bit that's slightly sort of snapped off. That should be easy enough to fix with some super glue. And then there is still a crack here running around the sort of gun section, as you can see just here. Now that again is in the main part of the shell of the Falcon, so you would be able to see that on the inside. So I think I'm just going to super glue that, and that should hold quite nicely. As you can see, some of the milliput has sort of come through. You can just about see a little bit of yellow there. I think that's perfectly acceptable considering how damaged this Falcon was. I'm not going to be too picky and expect it to be perfect. And when I come to do the stickers on this, I'm going to try and use some of my battle damage stickers to cover the worst section, so it actually looks like it's a sort of more beaten up Falcon. I think that should hide them quite well. Overall, I'm really quite pleased with how this has gone. So it looks a bit messy on the inside, but it is going to work. I just got to let that wait for it to sort of go off, and then we can start on the next part of this restoration. the inner cardboard that came with this Falcon is in a pretty sorry state. Now I could just make a sort of replacement by printing out a new one onto some thin card, but really I would rather keep this original one, because although it's pretty battered and sort of wrinkled, and it even looks like it may have been burnt at the top of it, it's got quite a lot of character to it, and I think there's enough here that it can be saved. It's obviously, as you can see, I think probably the worst part about it is the fact it's really wrinkled and it's quite dirty. So I think the first thing to do is to try and give it maybe a little bit of a clean. I think some lighter fluid on a clean cloth. I should be able to wipe off a lot of this dirt, and then once I've done that I'm going to iron it as well. Iron it with sort of on a low heat where it's a bit damp, and I should be able to sort of flatten this down a bit. So first up, let's use a cloth and we'll try and wipe off some of this dirt with some lighter fluid. So I just have a bit of kitchen towel here, and we have the ever so useful lighter fluid. Now I use this an awful lot for cleaning toys, and for paper products it's particularly good. So what we're going to do is just squirt a load of lighter fluid onto this cloth and then just gently start wiping the surface. Now it looks like you're making it worse because obviously the paper gets a bit damp, but the lighter fluid does evaporate off pretty easily, and it will leave the card looking as good as you can get it. And you can see here the amount of dirt that's coming off it. So just keep doing this until we can get it as clean as possible. I've now given it a good wipe over, and you can see the amount of dirt that's come off it. It's certainly a pretty filthy bit of card. I'm just going to let this dry. The lighter fluid will evaporate off and the card will go back to being as sort of clean as it can be. And then I'm going to iron it, and that should make it a lot flatter. And then once it's ironed, we can repair these sort of tears that we have here. When you iron an old piece of cardboard like this, make sure that the iron is not too hot, and always protect it with a tea towel or something so you're not ironing directly onto the cardboard. And with a gentle bit of ironing, just go over the surface a few times, you'll find that the cardboard at the end comes out pretty flat. And as you can see here, this is the bit of card that I've just done, and it is not too bad. All of the wrinkles have been sort of softened out, and it's now starting to look like a fairly reasonable piece of sort of Falcon insert. The next thing we've got to do is, obviously there's a few rips on the back here. You can see that this is torn here. That's not too bad, and there's a little couple of tears sort of further along. I think this is the only one that I'm actually going to fix because it's such a sort of large rip. Now to fix things like this on this old card, the best thing to use is gummed brown paper tape. If you've seen my recent video on restoring vintage boxes, then it's exactly the same stuff. You can pick this up fairly cheaply. A roll like this will cost you sort of £4, and there is I think about 50 metres on here, so it does last an awful long time. So what you need to do is just cut off a small section of this tape like so, and where the rip is, now this rip is going, well there's actually a fold here in this bit of card, so it's going sort of vertically, so I'm going to stick this bit across the whole part of that rip, and hopefully that will strengthen it enough. So what you have to do is, with the gum tape, you need a bit of cloth, a bit of wet cloth. You can lick it, but I don't want to add sort of any germs or acid from my mouth, so this is just a bit of kitchen towel that's wet with tap water. Gently wipe that over the back surface of this gummed tape to activate the gum. Just move that out of the way, and then we can stick this over the rip and firmly press it down. Like so. And the glue sticks pretty quickly, so it's you don't have to wait particularly long. You see there, that's stuck it quite nicely. And then once that's dried enough, you can then just trim off the excess with a pair of scissors like I have here. So we'll just trim this down right to the edge of the original card. And here you can see I've now finished and repaired all of the rips. It was only this sort of one end that had the sort of worst of the tears in, so I've just stuck a few bits over most of the sort of the worst areas, and these are generally seem to be on the creases. As you can see here that the damage had happened. But if we turn this over, you can see that this card, although it's still battered, it's actually not too bad now, and I think it's got a lot of character to it, so it would be a shame to throw this away and not use it in this restoration. If I was doing this to try and make this ship look as perfect perfect as possible, I would have actually recreated this, because it's a pretty easy shape to make. You can just print this out onto some fairly normal paper and then back it onto some card and cut it to shape. But in this instance, I do prefer this sort of battered, worn version, just to give the ship a little bit more character, especially as the rest of the ship is going to be fairly beaten up as well. It's now a day later and the milliput and glues have had time to dry, and we can take a look at the top section of the ship. If I turn this over, you can see all the milliput I put in has now gone absolutely rock solid, and this ship is feeling pretty sturdy again. Actually, probably you wouldn't even be able to tell that it had been broken. You can obviously still see the cracks, but it is really pretty solid now. I did the final bit of gluing here as well, where the crack goes around the gun section. Obviously you can still see the cracks, but it does feel pretty solid, so I'm hoping that when this is all put back together, the ship will be fairly sturdy. As you can see here, I've managed to collect together quite a few bits for the Falcon. I've had some very kind donations from Steve Edmonds and Newell Barrett for some bits that I didn't have. Newell sent over the cockpit section here. This is missing the glass, but it is the actual sort of cockpit outer, so that's a great piece to have. And he also sent over some gun parts that he'd got in his collection, and I had some bits as well. One of the gun bits that he sent over is missing the end of one of the gun barrels, but it's also missing, rather strangely, the bottom section here that clips onto the sort of gun mounting. And funnily enough, in my collection I also have another one that has exactly the same piece missing, but mine is not missing the top bit. So I need to either work out a way to sort of replace that bit, or we need to find another sort of left hand side of this gun. I've also got a radar dish turret holder, and the radar dish as well. I think that was sent over by Steve Edmonds, so I do have the whole of this sort of piece. Unfortunately, the radar dish is missing the little peg there, but I've worked out a way to fix that, and I will cover that in the next episode. Otherwise, I've got most pieces. I'm still missing a few bits and bobs, like the glass. I haven't got the gunner glass, I haven't got the gunner chair, I've got the gunner mount, but not the actual chair part, and a few other bits. So if you have any spares and would like to donate to this project, then please do get in touch. I will be sending out stickers and badges to people who help me on this project. And this Falcon is going to be returned to the guys over at Geek Force, and they are going to be selling it on for charity, so it is all going to go to a good cause. So this is it for part one of this restoration project. In part two, I'm going to actually try and work out a way to add some custom lights to the Falcon, because there's such a lot of space going to waste inside the body of the ship. I thought it would be a nice idea to add some lights. I want to add some headlights on the front of it, a light in the cockpit, a light above the gunner station, and also some lights on the underside of the vehicle, so that when you have the Falcon resting with the legs up, the underside is nicely lit on the ground, as I think that will look quite nice. And if you've watched my recent Slave 1 customization video, that all came out pretty well, so I'm going to try and do the same thing on this Falcon. So I hope this video has been of interest to you all, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter and Facebook.